Welcome to the third installment of How to Be a Housewife. And with Valentine's Day coming up, I thought I would show everybody how to cook the perfect steak. Now, being a recipe blogger, I see people all over the internet making it very, very complicated and marinating and doing all this other kind of stuff, which is all fine and good. But I am going to show you how to buy a basic steak from a grocery store. You're going to use a little bit of butter, some salt and pepper. I'm going to add a little bit of this multi-purpose seasoning just because this is a new find for me. If you watched my Trader Joe's haul video, I talk about this and I will link that video in the description below. And you're going to use a little teeny tiny bit of heart-healthy corn oil. Now, normally I cook my steak in a cast iron skillet, but I know a lot of people don't have a cast iron skillet, so I'm going to show you how to do it in just a regular old skillet that everybody has. And if you do want to see how I cook it in a cast iron skillet, I will link in the description below a blog post I wrote about cooking in a cast iron skillet and making a steak. So let's get started. The first and most important thing is when you buy a steak, you want to look for good marbling. So I'm going to unwrap this and I'm going to show you guys what A lot of people have a misconception that when you get a steak, it should be perfectly red. I wish this one actually had more marbling to it, but it doesn't. It was the best one that the grocery store had. The steak was like $8 or something like that. But anyway, you want to see like little dots of white fat throughout the meat. And as that cooks, that's what kind of gives the meat the flavor, and it gives it great texture, and that fat kind of renders, meaning it like melts into that meat and it just makes it super tender. So these bigger pieces of fat, these are okay in a ribeye. These are delicious to eat, but if you don't want to eat that, you can kind of cut around that. But for me, with a ribeye, that's like the best part. But yeah, you want to look for a steak that has like little dots of white throughout it with a decent ratio of the red part. The next thing you want to do to make a perfect steak, and again, I will link the written steps to this below from my blog, is you want to make sure that the steak gets to room temperature. So now this has been sitting out for like an hour. And I know that's scary to some people with bacteria and everything like that, but you're going to cook this steak at such a high heat that the bacteria that may or may not have grown on the meat is going to be killed when you sear this meat off. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get this skillet nice and hot, and we're going to add a couple tablespoons, about 3 tablespoons of butter to the skillet. I've got my skillet on a higher heat, and I've got these big chunks of butter in here. Don't be afraid of butter with this recipe. You want this steak to taste delicious. So I'm going to go ahead and get this butter melted, and I am going to get this skillet screaming hot. So then we're going to come over here, and I'm sorry, I'm trying to do this one-handed, so bear with me with my camera work, but you'll get the gist of it. And I am going to just take a little tiny bit of oil, just a splash. You want to use an oil like this, or you could use melted butter because it has a high smoke point, which means it won't burn. And you want to make sure you're not like burning up that steak. So you don't want to use an oil like olive oil, even though sometimes I do use olive oil and I know that's wrong, but also olive oil gets like toxic, I guess, or something when it gets super hot. So I just use good old-fashioned corn oil. You can use other better for you oils like grapeseed oil or whatever, but I'm happy with the corn oil. This Mazola corn oil, not an ad, but it's like a heart-healthy oil. They did some study I read about. But anyway, you want to oil up your meat like this on both sides and all around. And I'm sorry, I have this new microphone that I'm using, so like if you hear like me breathing, it's not that I'm heavy breathing, it's just that I have the microphone really close because of like recording issues on the iPhone. So then you're going to want to take your salt, and I use this Redmond real salt. It's an ancient fine sea salt. This comes from Utah, right here in the United States. I really like this salt. You can find this at most grocery stores. I've seen it on Amazon. So you want to salt up the outside of your steak, and I kind of just press that in. And then you're going to want to do the other side like that. You're going to kind of just push that in. And then I'm going to go ahead and pepper it up. This is a pepper grinder, and since I'm recording with my one hand, I'm going to have to do it with 2 hands. So I'll be right back. So I've got the pepper all over the meat. My butter here is nice and melted. Now I'm not going to use the seasoning salt until the end because I want to make sure that the meat makes as much contact with the pan as possible. So if I put any other kind of seasoning on it, it's going to lift parts of the meat off of that skillet, and I don't want to do that. I want to make sure that the meat has as much contact as possible. So we're going to pick up this meat and we're going to go ahead and we're going to lay it in the pan away from you so that it doesn't splatter up and burn you. And you do absolutely nothing at this point. The biggest mistake, well, one of the biggest mistakes that people make when cooking steak is they're doing too much with it. You just, depending on the level of doneness, which I like about medium rare to rare, is you leave it on one side and you just let it cook. So I have figured out through the years that it takes about 6 minutes on each side to get the steak the doneness that I like. You want to buy yourself a meat thermometer and Google some doneness temperatures and test the meat, and you'll learn to get a feel for how the meat feels when like you touch it and feel it. But I know that my steaks take 6 minutes on each side to be the level of doneness that I like. So we're just going to go ahead and leave this guy right here, and in 6 minutes I'm going to flip it over. Cheater meal. I bought a double baked potato from the grocery store that's already cooked. So I'm going to preheat my air fryer to 390 for 5 minutes, and then I'm gonna pop that double baked potato in. I'm just making this meal for me tonight. Mr. Tipsy is not home. I just wanted to be able to show you guys how to do a steak dinner that's quick and easy. So this guy is preheating for 5 minutes. I use the GoWise USA air fryer that I got from Amazon, and it's the one that's on there that's like $64. My steak has been cooking for the 6 minutes, so I'm going to go ahead and use my tongs and just flip it over and let it cook for another 6 minutes on the other side. You see that beautiful crust and how all that fat is getting all melty, rendered off. This is gorgeous. So here is the double baked potato I got from my local grocery store. This thing was like $2.66. It looked like a really nice potato. So I am just going to pop it in the air fryer. It is not frozen, but it's beautiful. I'm going to pop it in the air fryer when it's done preheating. I'm just going to kind of start it out at maybe 5 minutes and see how it looks. But this has got like sour cream, cheese, bacon. I've had these before from my local grocery store, Mariano's, and it's absolutely delicious. We are almost halfway to the 6 minute point on the second side. Now, if you wanted, you could add a couple of cloves of crushed garlic to this and kind of just let it sit in that butter and that fat and spoon it over the meat at this point. And you can also add some fresh herbs if you wanted. I'm not, because I'm going to season it when it's done with this umami seasoning blend. But you can just crush up a couple cloves of fresh garlic, throw it in there, kind of tilt the pan and let it sit in that butter. And you can also do that with herbs and then spoon that butter over the meat. You don't want to put the garlic in before this because your pan is so hot that you don't want the garlic to burn, because otherwise your steak is just going to taste like a big burnt piece of meat. I have turned off the meat. This is how the second side looks. I am going to go ahead and I'm going to just give it a splash of this umami seasoning that I am using. At this point, you would want to do the butter on it if you're doing the garlic method. I'm only going to season one side of mine because it's got salt in it and I don't want this to be too salty. And then I'm just going to take some of the butter, and just kind of put it over the meat like that. And then this is the last important step. You have to let steak rest before cutting it, otherwise all of the juices are going to come out. So you take it off the heat and you put it on a plate and you let it rest for about 10 minutes. That's all you need. It gives the meat time to settle. It will continue to cook like about 5 to 10 degrees after you take it out of the pan. So if you're using a thermometer, make sure you allow for that for your level of doneness. And while it sits, all the fat and juices redistribute throughout the meat, and when you cut into it, it's going to be a perfect bite. I did not mention in the beginning of the video that it is my 3-year anniversary of starting the brand The Tipsy Housewife, And like I said, Mr. Tipsy is working tonight. So I decided to go ahead and make myself a steak dinner to celebrate the anniversary and to show you guys before Valentine's Day how to make a steak. And I bought myself this beautiful bottle of rosé. So I am going to open this up. It's been chilling. It's nice and cold. I can't wait to drink. I've got the wine open. One day I'll set up the tripod and show you guys how to open wine if you don't know how. I was very surprised to learn that a lot of people don't know how. I'm going to give myself a generous pour because I have something to celebrate tonight. My meat's almost done resting. And over here I've got my potato in. Ooh, look, it's almost done. Obviously this potato looks done on the outside, but I don't know how it is in the center. So I'm going to stick this knife in and then carefully touch it to my mouth to make sure that it's warm in the middle, and it is not. So I am going to put it back in the air fryer and I'm going to turn down the heat. Well, I'm going to figure out how to turn down the heat. So I put the potato back in the air fryer at a much lower temp for a few more minutes to hopefully get the center cooked. This is my first time making this potato in the air fryer. If it is not cooked, the outside's crispy enough that I'll just pop it in the microwave for a couple minutes. So I'm gonna show you guys how the meat looks cooked. There is a little bit of juice here on the plate, which is fine. It's probably mostly the butter. You can pour that over the meat. Usually when I make Mr. a steak, he's a Neanderthal, so I cut up all his meat for him anyway. And he likes to eat on the couch. So you can see that this steak cuts like butter. And it is the perfect temp in the center. It's a little bit pink still. I don't know if the camera is like translating the doneness. But it's not bloody, but it's a little bit pink. I probably would have cooked this for a minute less. Like I said, normally I make this in the cast iron skillet, so I think this cooked a little bit faster being just like a metal pan. But to me this is like a perfect medium rare. Could be a little bit pinker for medium rare, but you guys get an idea of how it will look. So get a meat thermometer, check sometimes as far as meat doneness temps go, and remember that it cooks for like 10 more degrees after you take it off the heat. But as far as I'm concerned, because this is a ribeye and it's nice and fatty and tender, this is a perfect level of doneness for me. So my steak's all cut up. I've got it on the plate I'm gonna serve it on. I'm gonna pour those juices over it. And my potato is done. So I'm gonna put that on there. And then normally I serve like a green bean or something, but I just had a big salad. So this is gonna be the meal. And we also love A1 sauce, which I know is terrible, but I grew up with it and that's what I like. Don't judge me, eat what you like. So I am going to sit down, have my glass of wine and my steak dinner, and celebrate my blog anniversary. I hope this video helped you learning how to cook a steak, and thank you for watching this step of my anniversary celebration. Look at this potato, you guys. Look at that. Cheesy deliciousness.